Shit's Gone Sideways.
Cool. Well, we are back with another episode of Shit's Gone Sideways. I am here with comedian Marty Bright. Marty.
Hello. Hi. Thanks for having me.
No worries, man. I know we kind of played around with, what you were going to talk about today. Well, why don't we explore that? What's the kind of instance where your life went a bit sideways?
We did chat about it a little bit, about how my life went sideways, and you told me about some of the other guests you've been having. And,
it's not a competition.
Yeah, no, but I just wondered what type of sideways are you talking?
Yeah.
Diagonally sideways? But I think we settled on we settled on what happened to me as a kid and my life-altering experiences when I was younger.
Yeah.
Less to do with maybe decisions I made, but more situations I found myself in that just like rocked my consciousness.
Sure. So when this was when you were 9 as a kid, is that right?
Yeah. The dates are a bit blurry, but there was a period of a couple of years when I was between the ages of 8 and 10, where in the space of a couple of years my mum was diagnosed with bowel cancer.
Yeah.
Which she lived through and she's still alive. My mother nearly went to prison for possession of substances and whatever they say, enough that it was obvious that it was distribution as opposed to personal amount.
Yeah, deemed supply.
Yeah.
Yeah. What were the substances?
So I was under the impression, because my mum is such an open weed smoker, that it was just weed. But I found out later on in life, as she's opened up to me about that experience, because I was like 8, so I was like, I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
But as I've gotten older and we've just started sharing more, she told me that she actually had harder substances in her possession which belonged to somebody else.
Yeah.
And so that was cocaine, ecstasy.
Okay.
And on top of those two things happening,
I mean, how could you get caught with cocaine and ecstasy?
well, someone dobbed her in.
Unforgivable.
Yeah,
says the guy who got convicted of large commercial drug supply for 5 different drugs.
Yeah, exactly. The story is always shifting as I'm getting older, because I'm either remembering things that maybe have been locked in my subconscious, or as I've gotten older, I've been told more by the family.
Yeah, okay.
So the story is always like it's changing and evolving.
So where did you grow up at this point when you were a kid?
This was in Ryde,
yeah,
in Sydney, and in a house just with my mum, my older brother, and my older sister.
Yeah.
And my parents weren't together, and so it was essentially looking back on it. It was a deal house. I was answering the door, and some guys, some bikies there, like, oh, well, I'm here to see Shirley. I'm like the doorman.
Yeah.
And
had your dad ever lived with you when you were younger?
Yeah. Dad lived, but I think my mum and my dad separated before I can remember. So I've never known my parents together.
Yeah.
And it can't be weird if they were together. I like that they're not together. That's good for me. I got 2 different parents.
Well, you don't know any different, right?
Yeah, exactly. So people go, oh, I'm sorry, your parents aren't together. I'm like, no. I wasn't there I wasn't, emotionally mature enough to remember the parting of ways.
Yeah. And where did your dad live?
In separate houses
but nearby?
He moved around a bit, Coogee, Balmain.
Okay, but still in Sydney.
Yeah, still around. Like, it was still bouncing between both houses. But obviously between my mum being sick, her getting arrested, being convicted, but then getting sentenced to community service because of lack of capacity, because she was going through the grief of having lost a child, which was my brother, who was 4 months old when he passed away. So as a 7 to 10-year-old, there's my mum has a potentially fatal illness. My mum might be going to prison. My mum has a baby, and then 4 months later, my brother Aidan passed away from SIDS, clot death. So as a little sponge, youngest of the family, that was just planting a lot of seeds.
There's a lot to take in for a young kid.
Yeah, exactly.
In one short period.
Mm.
And so, I mean, what do you remember much from that period when your brother passed?
I do. I vividly remember waking up to my mum screaming, and being in my room with my brother and not knowing what was going on. It was just someone screaming. They're not saying what's happening.
Yeah.
So we just stayed in our rooms.
Yeah. What's the age difference between you and your brother?
2 years.
Yeah. Okay.
So we're kind of like looking across our beds to each other, like not talking, but just like we just stay here
Like
until someone comes and gets
What
us.
the fuck's going on? Yeah.
I think I remember looking through the doorway, and actually there was like a mirror, and I kind of saw feet moving, and I didn't know what was going on. And
But you knew it was something serious.
yeah, something serious, and my sister was out there, and the father of my brother was there as well, and the first person that actually came in the room was a police officer to come and tell us what had happened.
Wow. So a cop had to break the news to you guys that your younger brother Aiden had passed away.
Yeah.
Fuck, that's heavy. For anyone to have to be the bearer of that news to a young kid. But it's also horrible for you guys to hear that from a total stranger, right?
Yeah. I mean, the alternative would be one of my family members running in and telling me in a panicked, kind of heightened emotional state. So in some ways, might have been a little bit. It's a safer memory to go back, because I remember he was huge and he was like, "Kids," I got, very like kind of powerful, but also like nurturing voice. Whereas if
Yeah, right. I didn't think about that because, I mean, in an ideal scenario, it's your mum in a really calm manner doing something that she couldn't do at that stage.
exactly,
Right?
yeah. And then I remember, walking, essentially, being like led into the room that he was in, and someone, just being asked someone asked me, do I want to say goodbye? And I said yes. And so I remember like kissing him on the forehead. And
Oh man, that sounds very difficult for anyone, let alone a 9-year-old kid. And did your brother do that as well?
I can't remember actually.
So hold on, is he 2 years younger than you?
Older.
Oh, 2 years older. Yep.
Yeah.
Wow, man, that's some fucked up shit. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's bittersweet, I'd find it very hard to do, but do you look back and think, oh, you glad you got the chance to say goodbye in that instance?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I'm definitely glad I got to say goodbye, and I had a pretty close connection with him because I was the youngest, and then he was born, and I was 9. So I was like, I'm going to be the best big brother ever. So I was like running home from school to like feed him and play with him and stuff.
I don't really know much about SIDS. Like, what does it mean for them to just?
So they call it sudden infant death syndrome,
Yeah.
and that's what they do Red Nose Day for.
Okay.
That's what they're trying to raise money for, Red Nose Day.
Okay.
And I think over the years they've, added a few contributing factors to what they think leads to it, but it's,
They still don't know a great deal, do they?
Look, I'd have to look into it a bit more. I do remember there being an ad campaign years later when I was watching television one time, that said like secondhand cigarette smoke, like caught in fibers of fabric, can contribute to it. And it was actually like on the official Red Nose Day ad.
Yeah.
And then I think generally they talk about like sleeping on your stomach might have something to do with it. But once again, it's like,
there's a million variables to that, right? Like, so many kids do that and they're fine.
yeah, and I suppose it's a new life, it's a new body, it's still getting used to being functioning, so doesn't take much to throw it off course.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I suppose in some ways, like it being this enigmatic cause of death that's kind of mysterious in some ways. You know, for example, if it was something that was obviously you could pin blame on someone, like an accident, or I couldn't imagine what that would be like, because you can direct the anger or the grief or the loss at at an individual.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And so what was the time period like directly after the loss of Aiden? Do you remember much of that period?
I remember that I stayed with my dad a lot.
Yeah.
And stayed at that house because my mum was obviously grieving as a mother for a lost child. And then I think also because there had been instances where docs, which I think it's not called docs anymore, but docs had been made aware of the fact that there were kids living in a house with, drug use and happening. When that happened, like just zoom back, you go, baby died in house. That's known to have already been on the radar of docs. So let's not have the kids in that house for a while at least. And so it was a lot of staying with with my dad's side of the family, and I suppose going to school. I look back on it now. Going to school, I'm like, well, all the teachers knew, and I'm like, everyone's being so nice to me. It's like, yeah, because the teachers were just told, hey, just letting you know that kid's brother died.
Yeah.
So tread lightly.
Yeah, but you only clued onto this later, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you're operating on, it's an unprecedented like experience.
Yeah. Why are all the kids being so nice to me?
Yeah, yeah. I remember, and I ended up going to counselling. We did a few family counselling sessions together, and then I continued to see the counsellor that we saw.
Would your mum go and your dad as well? And your brother?
No.
Who went?
That would have been my brother, my older sister, and my mum and myself. I think maybe we did like 2 sessions altogether.
Yeah.
But I continued seeing that counsellor separately, as did my siblings as well.
Yeah.
And that was like so needed at that age, like for me, because I was an early bloomer too. So I was 10 and I started like nipple hairs and pubes coming through and like getting fucking unexplained boners on the bus. So not only am I grieving, but I'm also got the extra hormones of like being an early bloomer.
Yeah, you've gotten through this confusion of hormones.
Yeah.
Plus confusion of emotions.
Yeah.
That's a lot. That's a lot to be managing.
Yeah, 100%.
That sounds like a roller coaster.
Yeah, 100%. It was wild. Actually, that was when I started playing soccer. Because we were never a sporty family. So when my brother and I discovered that we loved soccer organically, not because like our parents were like, do me proud by succeeding in the thing I failed in, kind of energy. It was just like, oh, we like soccer. Yeah. And then that was a great outlet for my energy and hormones and anger.
Yeah, I was about to say that. Yeah. Was there any of that? Yeah.
Well, it's funny. If people watch me on the soccer field, that's like I'm a different person.
Yeah, wow. Because you don't seem like that kind of guy at all, right? But unleash the beast on the field, eh?
Yeah, I'm very provocative and I like to get under people's skin.
Oh, well, you got to get it out of you somewhere, don't you?
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so it was, like I said, it's a bit of a blur because so much was happening and there were so many different changing dynamics. But it was a emotionally dense period of my life that was very like defining for me because I think, when you deal with mortality at such a young age, you can't help but have it affect you for the rest of your life.
Yeah. And so what kind of effects did that have on you over time? Was it relatively smooth sailing for a few years then, or was it still a bumpy ride?
I think that, like I said, when I think about it, when I'm trying to access the memories, I'm not accessing the memories like, what was it like? I'm trying to look back at myself as a 9-year-old or a 10-year-old and go, what was he like? And I think as a kid, I think it's quite a natural response to not go too deep into the grief, because it's like, well, I don't have the tools to unpack how sad it really made me feel. So it's like you store it until later in life. Sorry, I stored it until later in life, until I finally had the tools to look at it properly.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's some people that you know there's something there, but you just not necessarily not only don't have the tools, but you also just lack the desire. Like, why do I want to go into that box if I don't have to?
Well, one thing that also happened was that I think 2 years after my brother passed away, on my father's side of the family, I have a sister now. So I remember I had all that. I can't wait to be a good big brother. I've been the youngest for 9 years, and now I want to, be the big brother. And then 2 years later, when my sister was born, I remember a little bit more consciously thinking, I remember this feeling. I remember I want to be a good big brother feeling. And so I did have a bit of a place to channel that energy in my sister.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, years later, once I left school, I quite quickly realized that I liked working with kids.
Yeah.
Which obviously there was obviously an ulterior motive for my subconscious to be like, prove to yourself that you're good with kids by, coaching gymnastics at primary schools or doing before and after school care, vacation care jobs. So I did have a lot of time to kind of get that energy out in healthy ways.
Yeah, there was some psychology there that you were drawn towards being the big brother, right? In a professional sense, almost.
Yeah, right? Which is good because I could see. I imagine that some people do the opposite and they push away those situations to avoid ever having to feel anything like that again.
Yeah.
And so I think the counselling would have allowed me to feel safer to go back to that place, as opposed to like, no, because if I love another sibling again, they might die. Or if I...
well, that's what I thought you were going to say about having a younger sister, right? Was that there was these complicated feelings of guilt or the loss of Aiden that made you reserved about being the big brother again, but you went in the opposite direction. You're like, oh, this is another chance for me to be that guy.
Well, the one way it did affect me, I remember actually, is that I think I stayed living at home a bit longer than I wanted to live at home longer, because let's say when I was 20, my sister would have been 9, and I didn't want to leave her as a lone child, so I would have, I wanted to, remain her sibling for me and for her, I guess.
So how long did you live there till?
I still stay occasionally. No fixed address.
Well, as a 36-year-old cool dude that lives with my parents, hey man, I'm on board with that.
Yeah. It hasn't always. I haven't been there since then, but it's quite. I suppose experiences like losing siblings and my family. We've been through a lot, so it's not painful for me to be in a house with my family for like weeks on end because we really. I enjoy my family's company. Not everyone does.
True. Yeah, you speak to a lot of people like that, right?
Yeah. You're like, one day, I went back for Christmas and I wanted to.
Or they'll say, I haven't spoken to my brother in 10 years or something like that. And you just think, wow, that sucks.
Yeah, it does suck. And that's like when I've been traveling overseas and that's been the biggest thing that when I lived in New Zealand for a year, which is where my parents are from.
Yeah.
During the pandemic, I was just like, wow, I have, get a bit of perspective and a bit of distance. I have such an amazingly, unconditionally accepting and supportive family. Not to rub that in anyone's face, who doesn't.
Yep.
But sometimes when you lose perspective of how good you have it.
When you're too close to something, yeah, for sure. Sometimes, a little bit of absence can make the heart grow fonder, or just a few steps back can just give you that perspective particularly when you see what other people's situations are.
Yeah, 100%.
So
It's interesting though. Sometimes I'm in conversations with people that I know have like fractured or less than ideal relationships with their family members, and this happens to me more than a couple of times. There's more than a couple of times that has happened, where I'd be talking about my relationship with my brother or my dad in a way that shows how much I love and respect them in some way. And I look at the person and they're looking at me and I can see in their eyes, it's something resembling envy or wishing that they could speak in that way about the relationship they have with their family. And I must admit, sometimes in my life, I've actually dimmed my truth of my positive situation.
What, just to make other people?
Well, because I don't want to make someone feel bad by holding up a reflection that, like, by comparison to them, it's like, oh, me and my dad did this. Like this year, my dad and my brother and I are going to Wellington, which is where my dad grew up, to watch soccer games at the Women's World Cup. Yeah, and it's going to be a great experience away. Yeah, and that's the type of thing where if I talk to someone about going on this great family father-son holiday, that could just be like,
yeah, but that's their problem.
Yeah, but I'm coming to that now. But I think for a while, it's.
But you felt you had to couch all the positive things you said about your family by, oh, by the way, they're all crazy. You
know? Still asshole. No.
I had a similar experience. That I didn't realize how lucky I was growing up, because my dad had a first marriage where he had 3 kids, my older brother and my older sisters. Then they divorced, and my dad was introduced to my mum, and they had myself and my sister. But I grew up with my dad's first wife living 2 minutes down the road, right? And so my older brother and older sisters, who were my half siblings, I grew up with them being my full siblings and sharing and splitting their time between the 2 houses. And my dad's first wife and her new partner were like my auntie and uncle. And even to this day, my dad's first wife, Di, is like best friends with my mum. They hang out all the time. And so I grew up with this tight-knit family where they all just put their egos aside.
There's no battle lines.
There's no battle lines. So just put the egos aside for the sake of the kids. And so because of that, I was lucky enough to grow up with my older sisters and brother as my full-blood siblings, right? And I'm richer for having all these people in my life. That you hear a lot about these people that are products of divorces who they have half siblings that they've met a couple of times in their life, right? And that's just sad because people can't put aside their petty differences for the love of the kids.
Yeah, 100%. And definitely, like you said, just feel fortunate and.
But it's only when I got older, right? When you get older and you talk to other people and you hear about other people's upbringings, that suddenly you think, oh wow, I didn't realize how lucky I had it, right? And that must be the same for you. You talk about your family, and so you're softening things because you're like, wow, I've been very blessed.
Yeah, definitely. And the thing, that those early, I guess I don't often use the word trauma, but those early experiences, it was like we got a lot of our work done early.
Yeah.
We didn't wait till people were on their deathbeds before we're like, oh, by the way, I always wanted to tell you this thing. Yeah. Because the whatever forces drive life were like, deal with your shit now. Maybe you are a child, maybe it's tough. But then, like, my mum's my best friend. Like,
that's cool.
There was a lot of resentment I had towards her, subconscious resentment that we've smoothed out over the years.
What do you think that was about?
It probably comes back to what I was saying about the blame. Like, it wasn't that I blamed her, but it's quite a natural human kind of coping mechanism to want to blame someone.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't a conscious blame, but it was like an ickiness in here. And yeah, I think once again, like living in close proximity to her wasn't healthy for some years because we were both needing to do some solo grieving. We were kind of like double helixing our grieving together.
So tell me about that. When was this period where you felt this need to be grieving? Was this many years past the actual loss of Aiden?
Yeah, well, it was interesting because I grew up around drugs. I had quite a heavy. I had two households. One that didn't have any kind of like overt drug use happening.
That was your
and
dad's
my dad's
place?
place, and then another house where there's bongs on the table and random people coming over. So I knew the difference between both worlds. Whereas if I just grew up in one, I probably would have just, that's all I know.
Yeah.
So when I got a little bit older and I started to have my own curiosities about experimenting with marijuana or psychedelics.
Yeah.
And my relationship with my mother was a bit smoother.
Yeah.
Well, she was a great person to give me some really sound advice about don't mix that with that, or, never do that one, but, okay, just little tidbits of wisdom.
Just drug advice. Yeah.
Yeah. And when I started experimenting with, like, I had a few years period where I was like, my mum taught me how to make edibles. So I was eating like hash weed brownies like every few days, and if not every day. And I think it was those, and when I had a period with psychedelics, it was those experiences that kind of, I reckon, drew out some of the deeper feelings that
You had
were kind of dormant. They were dormant in there.
Yeah, wow. Was it negative feelings or a mix? What was just forgotten feelings? What was it?
I think it was all of everything and all of the above.
Yeah, it just dislodged something. That was
I mean those
bubbling.
Tears of, like, are they tears of joy or tears of sadness? And you're like, there's a spectrum, and sometimes it can be anywhere in between. So I think that those experimenting with those substances was probably like a catalyst to shaking shit up.
So would you say it was a positive drug experience?
Look, I'm not an advocate for encouraging anyone to do anything, because everyone's got their own like propensity or capacity to deal with like different things in their body. For me, I knew my limits and I knew when to stop just before I'd probably go overboard. So I think they were a necessary stepping stone to where I'm at now. Yeah. But I definitely see those fork in the road moments where like another quarter tab of LSD, wrong doorway, or another 6 months of psychoactive, THC flowing around my bloodstream, that there's a different sliding doors reality of where my healing would have gone, and maybe it could have gone worse.
Well, I am a drug advocate, and I recommend people should try magic mushrooms in responsible doses with friends in a safe setting.
This podcast was brought to you by
the Mushroom Guy.
The Mushroom Guy.
Yeah, okay, so that makes sense. So this stuff happened, all right? And so, I mean, was there any period during this drug taking where you kind of felt like you were a bit lost, or you were in a dark place, or?
Yeah, I think the period that was probably the most intense in that way was a place where it was huge highs and huge lows. It wasn't just constant dark. It was like amazing experience at some music festival because I have taken some magic mushrooms and met some new friends and end up in a situation with colourful lights and beautiful music, and then come back to whatever my day-to-day life is, coming down off whatever the substance is.
Mentally fragile.
Feeling vulnerable, also being like, I just want to be in the woods at a fun thing.
Yeah.
And then it's boom.
And you've also dislodged these memories that you thought had long forgotten.
Yeah.
And then you're like, holy shit, I didn't know this was still inside me.
Yeah. And looking back on it, that's amazing that it happened. Doesn't mean it was easy or healthy at the time.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think I remember one time I had a birthday party at my mum's house, and I took a quarter tab of LSD, a cap of MDMA, and a handful of really strong weed brownie.
All in a short period of time?
Yeah, like within the space of a couple of hours.
Okay.
Even though there's a little angel being like, you know that these things are like
Any
not going to work well together.
yeah, any one thing would have been enough.
And then cut to me a few hours later, lying on my mum's bed, and she's like stroking my head because I went up to her at my party. I was like, "Mum, help." And I didn't want to harsh anyone else's buzz.
Yeah.
But then again, glass half full. What a great experience to, trust my mum with nurturing me when I'm at a dark place.
I mean, yeah, there are a few mums out there that would be equipped to handle someone that's drugged up in that situation, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So what happened next? How long did this period go for of your life where you were like properly experimenting?
Yeah, probably like 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
And it was.
Did you feel like you were a happy person at this point?
I think I thought I was.
Yeah.
But looking back on it, I'm like, I actually remember a time where I thought I was having a great time in life. But looking back on it, I remembered little instances where it seemed like my family were treading lightly with me.
Yeah.
Or they were worried about me. Or they were like, let's make sure we ask about his day. Or, kind of like I was fragile. And at the time I was like, I'm doing great. I'm having a great time meeting new people. And
were you a drinker ever? Were you doing much drinking?
I had periods. I was never a huge drinker.
Yeah.
But I'm also like a pretty sneaky drunk. Like you can't really tell that I'm drunk. I don't change that much.
Yeah, I could see that.
So it, and I only ever drank spirits.
Yeah. What was your spirit of choice?
Oh, I changed. I think it was, I went from bourbon and Coke.
Yeah.
Classic ride, teenage boy, Woodstock and Coke.
Yeah, couple of woodies, yeah.
Yeah, and then I went to vodka and anything. Mm-hmm. And then in my later drinking days, it was just like vodka soda, fresh lime, that's it. That's the only thing I can justify. As I was fading alcohol out, it was the only thing I could justify putting in my body because it felt a lot cleaner than like coming home being like, how much like generic flavored cola did I just ingest over the space of the last 6 hours?
How many vodka Rebels did I just put into me? Yeah, but if you have 20 vodka sodas, I'm looking after my body, right?
Yeah, exactly, because it's transparent. It's got lime in it.
Yeah,
so it's a bit fruity.
Yeah,
that's how they get you. But yeah, so I haven't actually. This April will be like 2 years without alcohol for me.
What made you want to stop?
I was actually talking to a friend the other day. I never said to myself, I'm quitting alcohol forever. I think over the course of 3 or 4 years, it was like 1 year I did a month off. I was like, oh, that was easier than I thought. The next year came around, something happened, I had a bad hangover, and I said, I'm putting it down for a bit. Then 3 months later, I picked it back up. Next year it was maybe 6 months. So it was like I incrementally faded it out. I didn't do like a really brutal line in the sand. That worked for me because I think the guilt of picking it up again, it's like this, it can be a bit of a trap because it's like, oh no, I picked it up again. Oh no, I'm a piece of shit. Oh no, I don't deserve good things. So why don't I continue poisoning myself because I don't deserve good things?
So do you think you stopped for good now? Or is there a time where you would drink again?
I'm big on the never say never. But there is a voice in me going, you're done, just say it.
Yeah. But because when you get to that point where it's like 2 years, right? It seems like you're a creature. I'm a creature of momentum. Well, if I stop for that long, it's much easier to just continue to be stopped.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. There are certain drinks that will, if someone talks about like a nice spiced rum, or I'm like, oh, like I went to like a artisan rum bar in Perth, a few years ago, like when I was still drinking, and like if that was in Sydney, that would be the type of place I'm like,
I find it hard in social settings with like, you know, a lot of lads, particularly if it's a hot day and the beers look amazing, if someone's like, come on, you coward, have a beer. Like, that's about all you need to say to me. And I'm going to be tucking into them, you know?
I mean, I suppose it helps that I have a lot of social circles. Not a lot of social circles, but I have social circles where 90% of people don't drink.
Right.
So
that
it's
helps.
it's so much easier.
And plus, if you've already put the message out for a long enough period, like that you're not drinking, then it's less likely that people are going to try and do the peer pressure thing, right? Particularly when if they know that you're trying to not drink. Do you know what I mean? Like when mates peer pressure you, it's usually because they just want to drink with you. It's not because they are trying to get you to continue being an alcoholic if you're trying to stop, you know?
Yeah. Well, I think I was at a pub on Saturday night. You were there, I think. And everyone was drinking in a beer garden in Newtown. Yeah. And I was chatting, having a great time, having a laugh. So people don't think to ask me if I'm having a drink because they think I am. Yeah. Because I'm able to continue hanging out. I'm not like, oh, everyone's drinking and I'm not, so I'll either be glum and a bummer in the corner or leave. I'm like, let's have a great time. So people will probably just assume I am.
I definitely assumed you were.
on Saturday. Yeah. It's contact high. Because I can smell it in people's sweat.
But if you're standing around tables and there's a whole bunch of drinks,
one of them's his.
Well, right? Yeah. They belong to someone.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, you you just make the assumption. You're right.
Yeah, I have actually started drinking Woolies, and a few supermarkets have these like mocktail rip-offs, these like placebo spirit mixes.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've had the non-alcoholic beers, and some of those are okay, but this is a non-alcoholic cocktail.
Yeah, they have like a spiced rye and lime. So it tastes like a spiced rum and ginger ale or something.
Yeah.
And because I haven't drank for so long, it fools me.
Yeah.
If you put it next to like a connoisseur of rum, they probably know the difference. But my body just goes, I'm drinking from a can on the train to the gig. It's got a little bit of energy drink in it to give you a buzz.
I just can't believe how much they're fucking charging for some of these non-alcoholic things. It's fucking like, it's just juice or soft drink, right? Essentially.
It's water and sodium and a little bit of like citrate.
They're selling at some of these pubs. They're selling like heaps normal non-alcoholic beers for like $10 for a can, and it's just like, this is absurd.
Well, that's how desperate people are to fit in.
Right?
They're like, I want it to look like I'm drinking, but I'm not.
It's crazy that they're charging that much for something which they're just not even paying any alcohol taxes on.
Well, when I went to get a soda water at that pub on Saturday, there were two women probably in their mid-40s, blonde women, seemed like they were from like a regional town in Australia on a big weekend in the city, and they were both carrying like 3 drinks each back to their table. And somehow we got talking, and I was like, no, I'm not drinking. Oh, they were buying shots. And she's like, we'll get you one. Like, no, I'm not drinking. She's like, what? What the fuck are you doing here then?
You're not drinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm having a good time. She's like, so yeah.
Some people still think you're a weirdo.
Yeah, that's cool. And that's what I love is like, I'm not anyone who is drinking or partaking in something that I've put down. Yeah. I never judge anyone. I never like, oh, I've had my time with it, so what are you doing? I'm like, that's you. You do you. Yeah. And that's why I can be in a beer garden where everyone's flopping and Marley, I haven't seen you in years. Because I can still see the love. Yeah. I can still see it might be just a bit of blah.
Yeah.
But
that doesn't
I can read between the lines.
That doesn't annoy you?
Yeah. Look, if it was aggression, I wouldn't like it.
Totally. But even if I'm sober around a whole bunch of drunk people, even if they're all friendly, most of the time they are all being friendly. But if I'm not on their level, I can only handle it for maybe half an hour before I have to get out of there.
Well, I did leave at probably 11:30. So, if I was in that same venue at 2 a.m., you might call my bluff.
Yeah, yeah. He'd be like, man, either you're drinking or you're the most patient man in the world because there's something that ain't right here.
Yeah, people started twerking to YMCA. And I was like, by the village people, and I was like, I think I might get a
I
bus.
think it's time to go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So, how did you find your way out of the period when you were drinking a bit more and you were doing the drugs? You were just doing more than you should have. How did you did you just grow out of that phase, or was there?
So when I started going to what people would call doofs, or
Yep.
like these kind of like pseudo spiritual
bush
hippie
doofs?
festivals.
Yeah.
Yeah, so some of them are like just, it's assumed everyone's taking some type of hard drug, substance, chemical, whatever. People are, doing nangs and
Oh, I used to sell shitloads of mushrooms and MD to people going to these.
yeah, and when I started at some of those events, they do have like yoga in the morning and like meditation and people, wearing an Om symbol around their neck. And I started to gravitate more towards the wellness side of those communities.
Yeah.
And so that was, I think, what, going to a few like meditation retreats where like you're not even allowed to have coffee or, just participating in a few activities that encouraged sobriety, even though I didn't fully like lock into them straight away.
Yep. You just explored it a bit.
Yeah, I
and you liked
slowly
it.
started to tip the scale in terms of what I prioritized.
Yep.
And those communities or the friends I started to make in those circles started to feel nicer and more beneficial and healthy.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I mean, when I think of bush doofs, right, all I think about is the kind of late night, the heavy music and the drug taking. The first, second, or third thing that wouldn't come to mind is the wellness piece of it, right? But that's just a perception thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting because there's so many, like I've performed comedy and poetry and music at some of these festivals, and there's such a spectrum. There's like, these like proper like bush doof where it feels like you're on another planet with the lights and the music sounds like robots fucking. And then there's other festivals like one I'm performing at in New Zealand in a few months. Yeah. And it's like no drugs, no alcohol. It's sober, it's family friendly. Some of the same musicians play. Yeah. But it's about the tone and the frequency emotional frequency that they want people that they kind of want to create. Yeah. And there's lots in the middle where people, I suppose a lot of people with psychedelics in particular, a lot of people have quite profound experiences that might be likened to something of a spiritual experience.
Yes.
So those experiences touch, and for a while I kept trying to go back into that experience as that's where I want to continue to have these experiences from. And then there's more subtle experiences that I had, for example, going to meditation retreat for 5 days, not talking, not even having a coffee, and facing myself in that way. I felt like I feel like that is unsustainable.
The drug version.
Yeah, and there's like there's a guy that a lot of people have heard of, Ram Dass, who is an American guru, essentially. Some people use that word, who experimented with psychedelics in the 60s at, I want to say Harvard. I might be getting that wrong. Harvard University in America, and ended up going to India after he got disbarred from doing these experiments in an American university and lived with some guru in India. And then he was essentially one of the main people that brought like yoga and New Age meditation back to America. And so I listened to a lot of his like lectures from the 60s and 70s. And he had a similar experience where he used to lock himself in a mansion with tons of people taking LSD for weeks on end, and then got to a dead end. And
Orgies? Were they having orgies?
Oh, I'm sure of it.
Yeah.
Orgies with people with like, dragons with 3 heads and
Yeah.
But I remember him speaking right at the time when I was probably doing too much of the psychedelics. I remember someone directing me to listen to some of his lectures and talks that he's done over the years, and he was speaking about the experience of, I think I've reached a dead end with how much I can gain from these substance-fueled experiences.
Yep.
And I now want to see how deep I can go without them.
On a journey inward, right?
Yeah.
Shout out Ram Dass.
Shout out Ramda.
Cool. So, I mean, that sounds a meditation retreat spending 5 days not talking and looking inward sounds horrible to me.
Yeah.
That sounds absolutely fucking horrible.
Well, sometimes longer.
What's the appeal?
What's the appeal?
I mean, yeah. Well, I can't sit still for half an hour. That sounds excruciating. Do you start on a 1-day retreat and then work your way up?
Yeah, no, I did. I definitely did.
Yeah.
I didn't go full blown, months on end living in a cave by myself on the first day. I think I did like a 1-day little this is how you meditate, kind of beginner's course at a Buddhist temple down in Wollongong, and then it was like 3 days and 5 days. And,
I mean, Dave Boyle was on here the other week talking about he meditates, and he was saying like just sitting and trying to be quiet on your own for 5 or 10 minutes, is enough to realize just how little you do that normally in your life. Just how hard that can be, just to try and quieten yourself.
Yeah, definitely. I think that also a lot of the things I do as like work or my career are about talking. And as from my voice, you can probably hear it. So it's like, I like to intentionally do something that doesn't involve like me
Making
noise, expressing, and act like my mind being super active, especially with, I don't want to rag on about technology, like the good old days but like that, the phone just stimulates so much stuff that it's like, if I don't do something to attempt to just quieten the noise inside a little bit, then it's the boxes pile up in the attic.
Yeah.
And, it's good to be able to talk about stuff like this because I don't often talk about it, once again, dimming my light, because I don't like to I have this fear of coming across as like, oh, the preachy, the preachy Aussie dude that did a couple of LSD ayahuasca ceremonies and now he thinks he's a fucking guru.
Yeah, but
it worked for me. That's all I can say.
There's a difference if you're going up to every fucking random stranger or person in comedy, right, and telling them, right, then it'd be like, has Marty Bright done his meditation speech to you yet?
Yeah.
But if you're here,
there probably was a period where I was closer to doing that than I would have liked.
You're sounding a bit like my recent guest, Jehovah's Witnesses. Can you start doing door knocking? Hey, man, have you heard about meditation retreat?
Yeah. Well, there's a line I sometimes say on stage where I tell people that I address that I might appear as like some type of new age person, and I say, but it's okay. Like I don't, just because I meditate and I do yoga from time to time, it doesn't mean that I'm like above you in any type of way. I'm just a flawed human like all of you, my children. I say it all the time, but it's just, it's fun.
Yeah, but it's different. It's not preachy if you're already balls deep in a conversation about it, right? And we're exploring it because
100%.
It's like you fell into it because you were looking at just other avenues, right, of just exploring yourself, and this was just another one that came to you from attending these events.
Yeah.
And you felt drawn to it, and it's felt like a far more wholesome, sustainable way of doing that piece of exploring within, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And so do you find when you go to these events, is it a lot of the same faces? A lot of you've got a kind of a cultish crew of people that go?
There's definitely been events that I've been at, like
Yeah.
when I sat in at a gathering and participated in an ayahuasca ceremony. Like there was a moment I looked around and I thought, there are lots of people in my life that if they were standing in this room right now, they would say this is a cult because of their experience and how they would see it.
Yeah, I got invited when I used to sell mushrooms. This guy, I think he was South African, kept trying to invite me to go away to like the middle of nowhere for these ayahuasca ceremonies, right? And he was talking about how like the day before they do the ceremony, they do like a rehearsal ceremony, and they wear kind of garments. I think it was like robes or some shit. And like I was like, if I go with this guy, I am going to get murdered in a blood sacrifice. Like it sounded like absolutely insane cult behavior.
Yeah.
You're saying you've done this?
Not that one.
But something similar.
Wait, what was his name? No. Yeah, I once again not coming from the place of everyone should do it, but when it was presented to me, I was at a time when someone invited me, I was at a time when I thought that is something I'd like to do. And
how many people were involved in the ceremony?
It varies. I've done it a few times.
20 people, less,
more 20 or 30.
Yeah, okay.
One was 20 or 30. The other one was maybe 10 or 12. And
Are you out in the woods somewhere? Where do you go?
private properties.
Yeah, private property.
Private properties that feel like, I suppose it would be the equivalent of, I mean, for example, the one of the ayahuasca ceremonies that I sat at was, they spoke about it like they were following the teachings of how they do it in a certain Amazonian tribe. And they try and do it the way they do it as much as possible. And so for them in some ways, it's kind of like church. You go, you drink, you sing, you pray, you eat.
I would wig out.
You dance.
If I was doing this for the first time with people and it felt kind of religious-y, right? And it was an ayahuasca, I'd feel very uncomfortable.
Well, it's interesting because there were a few people at one of the ceremonies I did where, because I was offered to do it many times before I said yes.
Yeah.
Because someone early on told me, you'll know when you're ready, or you'll know if you're ever ready. And so I remember waiting longer than I thought I should. But I remember speaking to one person after the ceremony who said, I wasn't ready for that. And I jumped the gun and I had thoughts that I was out of place. I was wigging out and I, didn't feel comfortable enough to like surrender to the experience because I was too in my head about what are they doing and this is weird. And
are they going to pull out a knife? Are they going to make me drink poison? I'd be thinking weird things.
Yeah, and I mean it's like I'm not advocating it because everyone's so different in how they deal with things, but
so what made you decide you'd waited long enough and you were ready?
I had a few people in my life that people that I really trust. Not just trust with secrets, but people whose perspective I trust on other people and time and energy, and integrity. Separate people told me about this one group that met and did these ceremonies, and they all pointed towards the same community, and it felt safe, and it felt
that would have helped a lot.
It felt like they'd been there before, sat through it all, and said, "Hey, I got a lot out of this," and it felt like 10 years of therapy in one night.
Do you have to wear a costume?
Had to wear all white.
All white, like just like t-shirt, like a robe, or like t-shirt.
They were pretty open with it. Like, I mean, I found beige pair of pants, like yoga pants, and it was like they're not like they didn't bring the Dulux color. Yeah.
Hey mate, that's ivory, but
yeah, exactly.
That's bone.
Yeah. And yeah, so I mean, coming back to what I was talking about with my brother, there was the third time that I sat in one of these ceremonies, I had an experience that felt like he was talking to me.
Fuck.
And that he had come to say goodbye to me, and that he had come to pass a message to my mother to tell her goodbye, and it wasn't your fault. And I was weeping in front of all these other strangers while they're playing, Amazonian drums and things like that. And regardless of what anyone thinks about whether that actually happened or whether it was a, figment of my imagination, the result is the same, which is that I feel at peace with the fact that I lost a sibling as a child, because I had some type of experience that felt like closure.
It felt cathartic. Yeah.
Yeah.
It gave your soul peace.
Yeah.
And you're right. Whether it actually happened or not, you're right. It's the same result, which is that helps you to move on with your life a bit after that.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, a bit of full circle.
Yeah.
In that story.
Did you tell your mum?
I did.
How did she feel?
She loved it.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, that's some pretty hectic news to tell her, right?
Well, the interesting thing is that, that it wasn't a surprise for her, because my mum feels him all the time.
Yeah, well, she strikes me as she sounds like a bit of a spiritual lady.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, she goes down to the cemetery where his plot is and speaks to him, and I mean, she even speaks to the.
She's more likely to believe your story than other people who might just take it as a drugged up psychosis.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I told her. I told everyone in my family. And even if someone in my family was more on the side that you just said,
skeptic, yeah,
comes back to how unconditionally loving and supportive they were. They just looked at me and went, "It looks like he feels better about it."
Yep.
Great.
Yeah.
As opposed to like, "Oh, the method was wrong."
Yeah.
The method was a bit wacky.
Yeah. Like even, my brother said that to me, I'll be like, "Good job, you nut. I'm glad you feel better."
Yeah.
Yeah. I
just like flies up into space with like fairy wings or something. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So, ayahuasca ceremony, it worked for you.
Yeah, but
have you been back since?
Just to preface, it wasn't just that. That was one part of the healing, which needed everything else that came before it.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just like, I have a thing, press play on the healing, or, just I want to snap my fingers and be healed, because that wouldn't have worked. If I had sat in that same ceremony 5 years earlier, once again, sliding door reality might not have.
You had to get to the point where you were ready.
Yeah, it was everything. All the different methods complemented each other in a very fortuitous way. But yeah, that experience stands out to me as like, when I talk about it, I'm there.
Yeah.
And I start to get the tears. It's funny, like when I tell people that I had a brother passed away, it's often other people that tear up over me. And once I had that experience where I felt him, that's actually when I start to tear up, but that's more of a tear of joy.
Yeah. But it's still a very emotional thing. It's such an emotional experience to feel that and to get that message, right? It's like, and it feels like it was a message that you needed to hear.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't think anyone else in my family was going to go and do that. So me going and doing it and then telling everyone else about it, it's good for everyone.
Absolutely.
It's not just like here, it's my healing. I can tell my mom, I can tell my brother, and it feels, it feels like healing for more than just me.
Yeah.
But not everyone had to be there.
Sure. But yeah, not everyone in your family was saying, "Oh, I'm experimenting with the spirit world to try and have a conversation."
Yeah.
With Aiden.
Should I bring my Ouija board?
So how long ago was that?
2018, 19.
Okay. Yeah.
Um,
Have you done any ayahuasca ceremonies since then?
no.
Really? That's interesting because I would have thought you had that experience. That's such an amazing, wild experience that it seems strange that you would not want to. Do you feel like that was you got everything you needed out of it, or would you go back again?
I think I've been trying to learn from my experiences about just because something's good once, don't just keep picking it up.
Yeah.
Don't run the well dry. And it was so powerful that I've still been kind of processing and integrating it for years. So if I don't necessarily want to go back and the same way that I waited until I was ready, or I never say never with alcohol. Same with these plant medicine ceremonies. I'm like, maybe if the situation rises up again, but if I go emailing people, when's the next one? Da da da. I'm like, is that my addictive tendency doing that, or is that it's right? It's good timing, and
well, if I had such a wild experience like that, I would find myself tempted to go back there. I don't know. I'd find it hard to stay away. Well, for good at least, just in case there was more there,
Yeah, well, it's definitely. There are definitely people that I've met that once they have their own version of that experience, they keep going back and.
I'd find that if you were having that kind of experience, I'd find it hard to stay away from forever.
Well, if you're in Australia, you'd have to be pretty rich to do it every weekend because it's pretty expensive.
Yeah. So would you say now that you're happy within yourself, you're a happy dude?
I feel like my mental health, my emotional health is the best it's ever been in my adult life.
That's good.
What I have been struggling with in the last few years is my physical health. So I've had knee surgery, some really bad tooth pain during the pandemic when they weren't doing any elective surgeries.
Yeah.
So constant tooth pain, and I've had an ankle injury. So
Are these from soccer or what?
yeah, they're see, and it does relate because the thing was, because I had all the anger and I took it out through my soccer, I played too hard, and I damaged my body, and now I'm paying the price at 33. But as far as my emotional, mental well-being and my family relationships, I feel great. So the body, it's more like mechanical healing.
We all get wear and tear, mate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I go through it.
If you can smell Tiger Balm, that's me Tiger Balming my shoulder, my ankle. I'd love a sponsorship from Tiger Balm.
Yeah. Shout out Tiger Balm. I still have trouble accepting just how much abuse I put my body through when I was a teenager, early 20s, and just you're like Wolverine. I recovered within 12 hours, and now the smallest injury just seems to just never go away.
Did you mean through extreme fitness practices or through partying?
Both, from whether it was falling out of a tree or playing rugby union or any wear and tear of the body. I just within 24 hours, a good night's sleep, I was back to full health, right? But it was you're like this body is great, and then you get older and suddenly the smallest injury just lingers forever, right?
Well, I'm house sitting at the moment, and I stubbed my toe on the little lip of going into the bathroom.
Right.
And that little moment after you stub your toe where the pain doesn't kick in, I just thought, okay, I'm either going to be fine or I've broken my toe and I'm not going to be able to walk for 6 months.
Yeah.
In that moment, it was going to be one or the other. It wasn't going to be like, oh, I'll walk it off in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
It was going to be, yeah.
But you were fine?
I was fine. Yeah.
I thought I saw a limp when you were on your way in here.
My ankle's still playing up. But yeah, so I mean, that's, I suppose where we started with the whole, losing a sibling and dealing with mortality at a young age and how I've, how that's come through my life in subconscious ways. That's kind of where I'm at the moment.
Yeah.
And feels pretty good, but I'm 33. There's going to be lots more grief and challenges in my life. My family aren't immortal, so it's going to come up again. Actually, I have a nephew who is now close to 2 years old, and when he was born, that's when I noticed some of the feelings came up again, because when he was getting around the same age as Aiden was when he passed away, my mum and I actually spoke about, are you noticing a kind of PTSD, trauma response, checking on him at night, anxiety starting to creep in? And so that was like the next chapter of dealing with it.
Yeah, wow. So it never fully goes away, but you find ways to manage it and also to find peace with it. And
also the fact that I can, like, just conversation, just having dialogue with people. Because if I had that feeling about my new nephew and I didn't have someone in the family I could talk to about it, well, it just becomes another thing I've got to bottle up. So that's, all the mental health awareness, are you okay day, it all comes back to just conversation and having dialogue with people. And,
if in the future you ever have a child, these feelings will probably pop back up again, right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it seems like you've so far you've found ways to manage it, whether it's by talking to people or, the ayahuasca ceremony piece seems like it was there was kind of a breakthrough moment, I think.
Definitely a breakthrough moment, and I suppose the walls were thinner because of everything else leading up to it. And everyone's walls get chipped away at by different. Some people, they need to go traveling for like 5 years. Some people, they need to have a vow of silence. Or some people, they need to, take up some hobby or passion or career that, like, allows them to put all their energy into it. But yeah, that's my vibe at the moment.
Well, I guess in the future, if you have another crisis point and you work your way through it, you can come back and have another episode of Shit's Gone Sideways.
Yeah. I thought you could say another ayahuasca ceremony. I'm like, no, I'm not advocating. I'm not that guy. I'm not the South African guy that was trying to lure you into the woods. I love that he was South African in that story too. It just adds like an extra like flavor to.
It added to the element of mystery. He was every time we come over to Bottom Mushrooms, he was just so adamant that I had to come, and it just I was like so convinced that I was going to end up on some kind of stone pillar, like cut into pieces. Like,
was he white?
Yes. He was a white man.
Right. Just like you know how they do with like the taxidermy heads?
Yeah.
But just your head?
Yeah. I was like...
above someone's mantle?
I could picture my own death. And so I was like, I'm never going away to a fucking ceremony with these kooks. But
yeah,
it sounds like there are positive versions of that story.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Cool. Well, I think... is there anything you wanted to add? Or I think...
No, thank you for... holding the space and having a good chat. And
no, that was great.
And appreciate it.
No worries at all. Marty Bright, thanks for coming in. This has been another episode of Shit's Gone Sideways.
Peace.
Shit's gone sideways.